Now, well, President Trump and some Americans may be turning back the clock on climate action. As Sean Fraser just indicated, we're picking up the pace. We're here today to address, in effect, three major issues that are wrapped into one big one. First, how to help hardworking families to finally get ahead. Secondly, how to boost the competitiveness of Canadian companies. And thirdly, how to build the strongest economy in the G7. All of these issues, each of these issues, is affected by how we as Canadians play our part in addressing climate change. Now, before I go into our plan, I want to say a few words about myself. I'm not a politician. I'm becoming a politician, but I'm not a politician. And so slogans, slander, and sound bites don't come easily to me. And because I'm not a politician, I don't like press releases that are dressed up as policies. So if I see a politically expedient but half-baked solution, I'll reject it. What I am is a pragmatist. So if I see that something isn't working, I'm going to change it. And today is about change, but it's not about cosmetic change. It's about the right change that puts money in people's pockets. It's about change that makes our companies more competitive. It's about change that builds the strongest economy in the G7. Now, when Pierre Poilievre says we have to choose between fighting climate change and growing our economy, he's lying to us. Canadians have had more than enough of such division and confusion. With Canada now under attack, it is time to come together. And since Canada's current climate policy has become too divisive, it's time for a new, more effective climate plan that everyone can get behind. It's a plan that makes our economy more competitive, it grows good jobs today, and it will grow better ones in the future. You know, friends, there are literally billions of dollars of investment on the table and millions of jobs at stake. So here's how our new plan works. My government will immediately remove the consumer carbon tax. But we won't stop there. Instead, what we'll do is create a system of incentives to reward Canadians for making greener choices. So it means that you'll no longer have to pay more to fuel your car or heat your home. But when you choose an energy-efficient appliance or an electric car or home insulation, you will be rewarded, and we will get the big polluters to pay for it. Now, let me be clear. If we were only to remove the carbon tax, we'd create two problems. First, Canada's emissions would not decrease as rapidly as before. And secondly, most Canadian households would be worse off because of the end of the rebate. Pierre Poilievre, with his simplistic and misleading axe the tax, doesn't care about either problem. Now, that's possible because he doesn't really believe in climate change. Or it's possible he thinks that Canada, for the first time in our history, should be a free rider on a massive global problem, leaving for other countries to solve. It's certainly clear that he doesn't really understand how important that money in the rebate is to hardworking families across the country. But we get it. We care. And that's why our plan will directly solve both problems by both implementing new climate policies that are at least as effective in lowering emissions and by bringing forward new economic measures that will make Canadian families better off. So how does it work? First, as I mentioned, to help Canadians invest in greener policies, we'll have the big polluters pay for climate incentives by developing and integrating a new consumer carbon credit market into the industrial pricing system. That way we ensure that taxpayers aren't on the hook for consumer climate incentives, while we still provide price certainty for households when they make climate-smart choices. The second thing we'll do is, with a new Made in Canada competitiveness strategy, my government will improve and tighten the output-based pricing system for large companies. We'll extend it to 2035, and we will speed up approvals of clean energy projects. That's okay. Thirdly, it's important. It is actually important. See, Cody knows just how important that last bit of that phrase is, because we got to get moving. Third thing we're going to do is to ensure that there's fair competition for our companies, and that we penalize high polluting foreign imports. So we're going to develop a carbon border adjustment mechanism. What that does is promote jobs here at home, it prevents carbon leakage abroad, and it aligns Canada with our allies who are still engaged in the fight against climate change. The fourth thing we will do is to build Canada's competitiveness. And we'll do so by boosting investments where they're needed the most. My government will provide greater investment tax credits, more Canada Growth Fund initiatives, and major provisions for accelerated depreciation of private investments. And these will all reinforce the incentives created by those changes to the output-based pricing system. What's the bottom line? Canada can become a clean energy superpower and make the most of our existing oil and gas resources during the transition. And there's more. We now have an opportunity to leapfrog the United States while they turn inwards and attempt to turn back the clock. Pour attirer les investissements là où on a le plus besoin, mon gouvernement va bonifier des crédits d'impôt à l'investissement, élargir les initiatives de fonds de croissance du Canada et accélérer l'amortissement des investissements privés. Ça va renforcer les incitatifs créés par notre réforme du système de tarification. Le Canada a tout pour devenir une superpuissance en énergie propre, tout en maximisant nos ressources énergétiques pendant la transition. Et on peut même dépasser les États-Unis pendant qu'ils se replient sur eux-mêmes en regardant en arrière. And lastly, to finance these good Canadian jobs and great economic growth, our government will move quickly to finalize and implement the Made in Canada Sustainable Investment Guidelines. We'll implement a taxonomy for every priority sector and mandate broad coverage of climate risk disclosure. And this is the key point, and I want to be absolutely clear. We will do all of this while remaining laser-focused on lowering costs for Canadian households. So we will be making big economic changes to ensure those households are immediately better off, and I very much look forward to sharing those plans with you in the days to come. Nous allons apporter des grands changements économiques pour améliorer immédiatement la solution ces ménages canadiens. Et j'ai hâte de vous présenter ces plans dans les semaines à venir. Now, let me finish. Eventually, the fever that has gripped our neighbor to the south, eventually that will pass. But while that fever rages, we will remain, as Canadians, we will remain resolute and we will remain true to our values. And those values include solidarity with one another and sustainability for our children and grandchildren's futures. So that's why the measures I'm announcing today will reduce emissions faster than before. They'll help create Canadian jobs. They'll build the competitiveness of our major companies and begin to realize Canada's immense potential to be a global leader in a clean economy. By working together, we will build that strongest economy in the G7, regardless of what happens south of the border. And we will do so for all Canadians across every generation. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Merci. And on va commencer avec des questions. Oui. Okay. So thank you, and I'll now be pleased to take questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Je suis
Carney.
prêt de répondre à votre question.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. We're going to start with the question period. We'll do one question, one follow-up. On va commencer avec la période de questions. Une question de suivi. S'il vous plaît, vous identifiez et nommez votre média. Please identify yourself and name your media. Go ahead.
Hi, Chris Lambie, National Post. You say you'll drop the consumer carbon tax, but will you maintain the federal industrial carbon tax? And if so, are you maintaining the current government levels and increases?
Thank you for the question. It's an important point. Yes, we are maintaining what's called the output-based pricing system, which is the price that large polluters will pay. The important, and there is an expectation, as you know, that that price will rise over the course of this decade. What that does is it provides a very clear signal to large companies to make the investments now, to get their emissions down, to become more competitive. What is innovative, one of the things that is innovative about what we're doing, is we in effect will provide them with more options to reduce emissions because they will be able to pay for the emission reductions of Canadian households. To be absolutely clear, you're sitting here in Halifax and you're trying to make a decision about buying an EV or a heat pump or home insulation or a better appliance, you'll see a clear fixed level of credit that you're going to get. But we as the federal government will turn around and monetize that from the large polluters. And that way, the taxpayer's not on the dime. The large companies have more options. The system's more efficient. We move forward together. Thank you.
Can I?
Next question, Bloomberg. Or Globe and Mail.
Hi, Mr. Carney. My name's Lindsay Jones. I'm with the Globe and Mail. And my question is, in the past, you've supported the carbon tax and defended Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's stance on the carbon tax. Why now? Why are you, coming out with this now?
Well, I think there's two things, Lindsay. One is that, and that's right, and it's worked. It has had some impact in terms of reducing our emissions, making things more efficient. But as I said in my remarks, and I think certainly colleagues would know and people would know, it has become very divisive for Canadians. It's the perceptions of the impact, the negative impacts of the carbon tax on households without fully recognizing the positive impacts of the rebate has made this more of a divisive issue. It's been fed by misinformation and lies, quite frankly, by the Leader of the Opposition, but okay. We are in this situation. And it's important that climate policy has broad buy-in. There's a better way to do things. We've worked on coming up with a better way to do things, which keeps an element of the price on pollution, the most important element, which is the industrial price. And I'll just point out for those who may be interested, that really what we're looking at is almost 90% of the emissions reductions are coming from the industrial side. So a little more than, it depends on the year, but somewhere around 10–11% coming from households. So we've worked a way where we're going to get greater reductions on the industrial side, some household reductions, driven by incentives, the carrot, not the stick, and have those industrial users pay for them. So this is a better, in the end, it's a better solution that builds off of what was there before.
Speaking of household costs, I guess I just wonder, can you detail these carbon credits a bit more? You talk about greener choices being rewarded. What do you mean by that, and how will that differ from, say, the carbon tax rebate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we will roll out is, once in government, is the specific credit levels for EV purchases, appliance purchases, whether it's heat pump, home insulation. So households are looking at fixed level dollar levels of rebates that they will get for taking those steps. And I should add, maybe just for the avoidance of doubt, I didn't mention this, but the way the system works, it's large companies that are affected by the output-based pricing system. So small and medium-sized companies that have relatively low carbon footprints, this also affects them. The carbon tax comes off them as well. Then they get a choice, and we'll design the incentive system for them. They get a choice whether to reduce emissions and also benefit from these types of credits. So we'll show those specific amounts to households for the various actions, small businesses. And then we as a government will take the emission reductions, those credits, and we will let them be sold into the output-based pricing system market, which has a credit system. And that's how the large producers pay for it. We can structure this so that there's no cost to the taxpayer, or recycle some of that money back into other climate action.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Prochaine question, last question, dernière question.
Luke Ettinger with CBC News. You say you want to leapfrog the United States and create alliances with other nations fighting climate change. Who specifically would you align with, and what would that look like?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, and I have direct personal experience with this, that virtually every nation at present is taking it more seriously than the new U.S. administration. Virtually every nation. And one way I can demonstrate that in concrete terms is if you look at the investment in energy, power, over the course of the last year, over 90% of it was in clean energy. Now, why is it in clean energy? It's partly for the, for domestic pollution reasons. It's largely because increasingly it's the lowest marginal cost source of energy. It's also because big manufacturers don't want to have a carbon footprint from their energy sources as they change where they invest around the world. So, and the leaders with respect to the scale of the shift, obviously it would include the European Union, it would include the United Kingdom, it would include a number of major economies in Asia that are fast-growing economies. Now, we have broader issues with some of those economies that we need to resolve, and we'll be resolute in coming to a conclusion on those. But it is a very large footprint of the world that is like that, and a consequence of that. You see, one of the things we have to do as a government, certainly we have to do as a country, is we have to manage the present. We need to focus with respect to climate change on what's happening to people's everyday costs and earn the right to win the future. That's what this plan is putting in place. Right? It's recognizing the impact on households, making them better off, giving them incentives to move, and at the same time, we're able to do more than one thing. We're able to realize that the world is shifting where one of the biggest determinants of competitiveness in any industry is going to be what your carbon footprint is. And we can own this. We can absolutely own this as Canada. This is our moment. This is our time. We're going to leapfrog the United States while they've turned inwards and trying to turn back the clock. They'll come around eventually. And when they come around, we're going to be ahead of them.
Now, on making big polluters pay, how are you going to ensure
Sorry.
that those big polluters don't pass on the costs to hardworking Canadians, as you say?
Well, you've got to look at what the big polluters are producing versus where that's consumed. So I'm Dofasco, I'm a steel company. I'm not passing on my costs down through to the level of the consumption product. Let me give you another example. When you look at the final value add, for example, I'm going to pick our steel companies again. in terms of the final value add impact of changes, we're talking in the tens of dollars into autos. So there's ways that that ensures that it doesn't come back down, in part because the nature of the polluters are there, and the fact that we integrate this with a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And in the end, what we're going to see is much bigger incentives for households, a more choice, and this is a crucial point, and I'll maybe end with this if I could, more choice for those large companies on how they get emissions down, okay? So they have the options immediately of reducing their emissions or working to reduce their emissions, but they also can pay Canadians to reduce our emissions. In both cases, our emissions come down. And it's a much more efficient system in order to do it. It will have a big impact, and it's going to ensure that taxpayers' money, that precious resource, that we can devote as a government to other priorities of Canadians, keeping their taxes down and ensuring that we continue to pay for crucial social services from health care at the provincial level to child care, dental care, old age pension, and beyond. Great.
Thank you.
Merci
This will put
beaucoup.
an end to our
Thank you.
press conference.